Hi there. So this is going to be part 2 of the little conversation I was having about why virtual reality is currently facing some challenges, and so in the last video, I talked a little bit about the signals that we are getting regarding the state of virtual reality applications. So the question is, how can we ride this slope of enlightenment? I don't know how many people are aware of this term. Let me just scale this up a little bit here. But if you look at the typical hype cycle for any technologies, it tends to follow this curve, right? So, well, here they say that we are actually, climbing the slope of enlightenment, and we don't really know what that slope is. It could be pretty much flat, and if it is flat, it's going to take years, to see progress. And I think we are probably in that space, and the people who are staying the course are probably going to be the people who are most resilient. And it's not obvious if this is correlated with the amount of cash that you have on board, because if you are like a company that's venture funded, it depends on how long your funders are willing to wait. But there's also a big community of virtual reality developers who are in for the long game, and they'll be sticking in and fighting it out. And it takes different, mindsets to address this issue. So let's, in order to ride this slope of enlightenment in an effective way, it's important, I think, to look back at the history of computing in the early days, okay, and then we can try to see what made it happen then, and what it would take to make it happen for the virtual reality market. So when I was very young, at least, maybe 30 years ago, you could see that in the early days of the computing market, at least the market that's mass-facing, that is for ordinary users, you would have. It didn't happen overnight, okay? So there was a significant period of time between the first Pong game and the desktop applications that people started using, and I don't think there were any home applications that people would be using, in their houses. I remember in the early days you would be having like database applications written in BASIC for for actually collecting information about your cassette tapes or things like that. But they were pretty much useless applications really, and people wouldn't be using them, at home. The applications that did get traction at that time, I remember, were desktop publishing applications, accounting software applications, spreadsheets application. I don't know if people still remember the very first VisiCalc application, and those type of applications started like pointing the way, and really show that they really paved the way for what we call productivity applications, because then it became obvious that you could use application X to do a certain task Y, in a much shorter period of time, and that's basically why these application took off. And then of course on desktop data publishing, there were a lot of process improvements from the phase where you would come up with ideas to write about, or articles to write about, and getting it published. And there were the early desktop publishing applications like PageMaker, and we don't talk a lot about this application now, at least I'm not aware of. But applications that we take for granted, like Word, etc. now, was really a big deal then. And there were quite a few text editors and similar applications then. The other aspect of computing during that period was the graphic user interface. Even simple things like menus had to be invented. Simple things like folders and icons, that's what constitute the graphic user interface. Okay, we won't go into the details of why they are an effective user interface. In the old days, there used to be a lot of discussions about whether command lines were better than graphic user interfaces, etc. And I think pretty much that debate is dead now, because it's so obvious that without a graphic user interface, you cannot have a mass market-facing industry. Okay? So that's how important this was. And I had this picture in here just, to remind myself about this point, and maybe to show Xerox and it's one of its early interfaces, which pretty much has influenced everything we see today. Then, of course, the Apple computers, the Macintosh computers, etc. There were a lot of experiments even then to try to design a desktop user interface, and that is very that everyone is familiar with now. So you can see that even at that time, like in this picture, there was some motivation to try to make things 3D. Okay, and I think Microsoft also did try a number of desktop user interface versions that looked 3D, and it was, of course, like a 3D world with 3D objects in it, but it was like a 2D interface that you could interact with, but you had things that look more like a desktop, like a picture of a desktop. So there was a kind of tension between trying to represent things in 3D and really going, deep and maybe eliminate the 3D completely and keep like a 2D interface and try to work with that. And it turns out that it might be more efficient to do this. Okay. If you go further back and look at what was happening in the computing industry, at least in some of the R&D labs, there were already a lot of work, that we are talking maybe 50 years now, maybe more, where people were focused on how to get users to collaborate across large geographic distances. And we find that even at that time, the interface that was actually, demoed looks very, very similar to what applications that offer collaborative functions, how this application works today. There's almost, I would say, no difference. Okay, we still have, the pictures, the little video of somebody speaking, and the shared whiteboard, or even if you have teleconferencing sessions, video conferencing sessions, you would have, all the speakers, like frames stacked up on a 2D plane, and you would be able to see them. So even if we are in a 2D realm, it's still possible to have these kinds of applications. Yes, so the previous slide that I showed here, so this guy was actually Doug Engelbart, and a lot of you may already know about his work. Yes, so that's basically what I was saying, that even, a lot of the applications that we are hoping would be, a lot of these applications that we are hoping would be done more effectively in a 3D space have been and are already being taken care of in a very, very effective way through a 2D interface. Okay, so it's very important to understand this trajectory so that we can navigate that the slope of enlightenment in a more productive way. Okay, so that we don't repeat the previous mistakes that's been made. Since we've been talking about, the 2D desktop graphic interface, I don't know how many of you remember there was, some time back, Google acquired a company called BumpTop, B-U-M-P-T-O-P, BumpTop. And it was supposed to have created a 3D desktop interface where you would be able to select objects in a 3D space, and these objects were icons that were, of course, the interface to your file documents, etc., and you could just move them about and do things like that. But unfortunately, I didn't see this application, any of the future iterations. I think the project was shut down by Google years ago. So let's see how long I've taken right now. In the next talk, I will look at the fundamental aspects of what happens when you try to take a 2D application and translate it into a 3D world, okay? And how we can actually do it very carefully. And I will try to explain the basics of why 2D works for certain applications and why it doesn't work for others. And that there's a very important distinction to be made between, like 3D data visualizations and 2D data visualizations, for example, and what we gain and lose across various, contexts. So maybe we can spend the next clip talking a little bit about that, and really try to find out whether we should consider 3D as an evolution of 2D, or we should consider 2D and 3D as two different media that have definitely clear goals and that can actually coexist in a given medium. And that's what I will be addressing in the next clip. Alright, so let me stop here for today.